I want to talk this afternoon on hospitality. God spoke to me, put a scripture on my heart a month or two ago, and I just felt that I needed to speak on hospitality. And there's lots of reasons to be hospitable, whether that's good business, it's part of your culture, or it's just good manners or good ethic. But today, I want to think about what it means for Christians to be a hospitable people, and suggest that the reasons for that have got a lot more to do with our worship and our identity. And with COVID restrictions, hospitality is going to look a little bit different at the moment. It will mean the extra Zoom call when you're all zoomed out. It will mean meeting up in smaller groups. It might mean talking to the kid who's in your school bubble that no one else talks to. Or it might be means looking out for the lonely or those that are isolating. Let's think today about what it means to be givers and receivers of biblical hospitality. At the beginning of the week, I read on a BBC website a story which I'm going to just share with you. It was about a Jewish girl called Helena Bach, and her family were fleeing from northeastern France, from the Germans that had invaded France. And sadly, as they fled across France, her younger sister and her parents were caught up by the authorities, and they were taken to Auschwitz and died there. They were murdered there. But Helena managed to escape, and with the help of other family connections and the French resistance, she managed to get to the part of France that wasn't actually under immediate German control. But even here, sort of the anti-Jewish laws were being passed, which meant that Jews were being rounded up and interned in camps. And in the midst of this persecution, some people did speak out. The Archbishop of Toulouse wrote a letter to his clergy at the time, and he asked them to recite this letter to the congregation. And it was in this article, and I'll read a few of the lines from the letter. And it said, "In our diocese, moving scenes have occurred. Children, women, men, fathers, and mothers are treated like a lowly herd. Members of a single family are separated from each other and carted away to an unknown destination. The Jews are men and the Jewesses are women. They are part of the human race. They are our brothers like so many others. A Christian cannot forget this." He was one of a few bishops that actually spoke out to this persecution. But it struck a chord with one sister, Denise Burgon, a nun in a convent. She was a young mother superior in northeast of Toulouse, and she took in Helena and almost 100 other children, and she hid them in the convent until the end of the war. And they put their lives at risk for these Jewish children for the sake of a stranger. It's an extraordinary tale of hospitality. It's life-saving hospitality. It's just possible that some of us may have experienced that kind of welcome from a stranger, one that literally saved our lives in some way. I haven't, but I have experienced some incredible hospitality over the years, and quite different, but still it gets much more to the heart of what I'm talking about and what I believe the Bible talks about with hospitality. Before we had kids, Felicity and myself, we did some short-term voluntary work in Egypt at a rehab. And while we were there, we were blown away by the hospitality that we encountered. A long-term missionary who lived out there, she put us up for 2 months, and she shared literally everything with us: her home, her social network, all her favorite TV programs we ended up watching with her, and just all of her experiences and knowledge of living in Egypt for she'd been there for a number of years. And it was a privileged few months for us to be welcomed in to her family. And we weren't even serving a project that she had anything to do with. She just did it because she was a Christian and she understood what biblical hospitality was all about. And secondly, we met many local Christians, and each time we went out or went for meals, they would insist on us being their guests. We had our own money, often more than they had, but it was a matter of honor for them that we were seen as their guests. In their country, they would organize things, they would pay for things. They took genuine delight in ensuring that we as strangers in their country would feel as welcome as possible. And I still remember one night they took us out and they encouraged us to stay out all night. That's the kind of thing Egyptians would do. And we stayed out and they insisted that we stay out until seeing the sunrise at dawn with a cup of tea. And we knew that the next morning, that same morning, we'd be up at 9 doing some training. But it was incredible that their passion for hospitality. And another impacting experience for me of hospitality was when I first became a Christian. My brothers in-laws invited me to their home. They'd never met me before, but as soon as I walked in the door, they treated me like family. It was an incredible welcome, an incredible experience. I was blown away that these people, they didn't know me from anyone, but they just were so welcoming with everything of theirs. It had a profound effect on me, so much so that even now, even though we hardly see this couple, even now my children call them Nana and Pops, because they the family connections that they see, the biblical family connections. And a final example I want to just give is I lived in Bedford and moved up to a street on Bedford, and it had 3 or 4 houses of Christians. And I loved that actually those Christians lived in and out of one another's houses. It was like an open door policy. You could just kind of stroll in. And I was a stranger, and yet it felt like I was part of the family when I moved up there. And I'd never really experienced anything like that before. And these stories, they all differ, but what they left me feeling was that I had a real sense that I mattered to someone. It felt like a real outpouring of grace to me. And many times I was a stranger, and yet they invited me in like I was part of the family, a welcome guest. And each time it was this common attitude that what I've got, you can have. I'll share what I have. What's mine is yours. My home, my friendships, my space at the table. It was a place to belong. And then no doubt that it cost, some of that would have cost them something to the giver. And maybe not a lot, but to be honest, having me and Felicity living in your house for 2 months may be quite a cost. And I didn't feel like I deserved that level of unusual kindness. It's a word that actually, that phrase, unusual kindness, Paul talks about it when he is shipwrecked in Malta at the end of Acts 28. And he talks about the locals offering him this unusual kindness where they take care of him and look after him. And I'm a bit of a cynical person. So when people are doing this kind of thing, I'm tending to ask myself, what's the catch here? But I can honestly say in these examples that what hit home for me was that actually this was a free gift. It was a gift to me. So with this idea of biblical hospitality, I want to step back and I want to look at it from the bigger picture about what it means to be in relationship with a God who is hospitable. And I say it was these verses in Romans that jumped out at me to speak on this. And it's from Romans 12. I'm just going to read it. I'm going to read verse 1 and then I'm going to hop on to verses 9 to 14. So it says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Love must be sincere, hate what is evil, cling to what is good, be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need and practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you, and bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn." Paul, who writes this letter to the Roman people, the Christians there, he's laid out this good news message. He goes through the chapters 1 to 11, laying out what God has done through Jesus Christ, how this messed up, broken, sinful world and is being transformed by Jesus, one life at a time. And it's by Jesus' saving act, and it will one day fill the whole earth. But his starting point is the impossibility of mankind to make themselves right with God. And this holy God is the one who is full of love and compassion. And through the sending and the sacrifice of his son, Jesus, a welcome home is offered to each one of us. Outcasts, strangers to God, have been offered a way back through faith. Faith in Jesus. And Paul describes this wonderful transformation that occurs as we're welcomed into God's family and welcomed back into it. He then goes on to talk about, he says, this family is going to cross racial divides. It's going to cross divides of class and gender. And Paul describes it as coming in an adoption into his family. And through this letter, Paul also talks about this has always been God's plan, that through the Jewish people, all nations would be blessed. And he says, some of you may have heard this phrase, but we're a blessed people, but to be a blessing. And what we've experienced, we're not meant to keep to ourselves. We're meant to give it away. In fact, God's Spirit compels that we do so. When we've experienced God's hospitality, his unusual, undeserved kindness, it's gonna want to express itself to others. And that's why this chapter 12, starts with that word, therefore. Because Paul's starting point is the big picture. God's hospitality is described in chapters 1 to 11 before he gets onto these instructions. We who were on the outside are now included because of Christ. We've been invited in to receive all the riches that Jesus has deserved. They're ours now by as a free gift. Hope, life, to be seated in heavenly places, a place in God's home, in his house. All of these riches, a welcome, is now ours as a gift from God. And everything in biblical hospitality starts with God's hospitality. And it's expressed throughout the Bible. God has always been about welcoming the outsider. And a number of times in the Old Testament, he reminds the Jewish people to treat the outsider well. And he says, why? Because you too were outsiders. But just to pick one verse, Leviticus 19:34 says this: do not take advantage of the foreigners who live amongst you in your land, but treat them like native-born Israelites. Treat them like the family. And love them as you love yourself. Remember that you were foreigners living in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So practice hospitality. Why? Because the Israelites had been rescued and taken by God as his chosen people. They had received his special hospitality, and that changes everything. It's the same theme that runs through the whole of the New Testament. We who have been welcomed into God's family through no efforts of our own. We're to throw the doors open to others. We've freely received that, and we've, as sons and daughters of his, and we're to freely give. That's why the doors of the church can never be closed. That Roman Catholic priest, that bishop, got it right when he said the Jews when they were being persecuted in France. He got it right. John, in his first letter, understood that well when he said, how can you love God if you don't love others? So practice hospitality, not from duty or because it seems like a nice idea, but because he is the Lord our God. It is our identity as his adopted children. How can we do anything else? So what's at the heart of expressing hospitality? Well, firstly, hospitality is an intentional act of worship. It's a sacrifice. Paul in verse 1 says, therefore offer your bodies as living sacrifices. Let this be your act of worship. There's a cost to hospitality, which the giver bears it. Sometimes it may be small. It's a bit of time or a phone call or a text message, just a cup of tea and a chat. Other times it requires great sacrifice, opening up our homes for a period of time, or like the nun, actually risking our lives. But each sacrifice is giving a little bit of me for the other. It's an act of worship. And Paul gives a pretty direct list of instructions. He says, do these things. He doesn't add a lot of fluff onto it when we look at those verses. He could have said it like this, couldn't he? It would be great if you could be a bit nicer to one another. Probably best to stay away from evil if you possibly can. But don't be too hard on yourself if you mess up. Don't beat yourself up. Bless those who persecute you, unless it's really bad, what they've done, or that they've done it loads of times. And practice hospitality when you've got a free window in the diary, or if it's convenient, or if it doesn't mess up the carpets. But let's hear again what he says in a very direct way. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need, and practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. Hospitality is inconvenient. It costs and it carries some risk, like the nun and her convent. Sometimes I've wrestled with the sacrifice inside. On one occasion, we had a guy who came and stayed with us, and he was in need of accommodation, and he was from our old church, and he was a pretty broken guy and quite a talker, actually. And every day I'd come back from work, and before anything else happened, this guy would just start chatting at me, offloading his struggles, and I tried my best to empathize with him as he came, as I came in the door, and I tried to pray with him and offer advice. And I had a pretty full-on job. And my family know that as soon as I come in from work, I do like a little bit of downtime if I can. But this guy would just unload on me straight away. And I'd like to say after a month or so, or two, I think it was a month of this, was there a great transformation in his circumstances? There wasn't. He moved on, he moved into his flat, and he stayed part of the church. But we never saw a load of breakthrough, not in my time with him. But where was the fruit then? I don't know. But what I'm confident of this is, you see, Jesus says that when we meet with him, all of it will be known. Everything will be in the light. And the real value of everything will be known at that point. And I'm confident that Jesus would have wanted me to have offered that guy something. So I did what I could. I don't know how God will see some of my acts of hospitality. Sometimes they felt very begrudging, and I'm challenged by, there's a verse in 1 Peter 4 verse 9 that says, don't do it with that attitude. And it confronts it in me. And I see my most human moments in these times, my selfishness, my self-preservation, my judgmental view of others, my fears. And I'm reminded that at these times that Jesus died for me. He was humiliated, shamed, mocked and killed, an outcast, but he welcomed me home. And these are the moments that I stop relying on me and I start trusting in him for what I need. Hospitality costs. Hospitality is intentional sacrifice. It's an act of worship. And I believe Jesus wants me to practice it for my good. COVID might change how we express some of these things, but the heart is there to share who I am with others. Hospitality in the Christian life, though, is also, and this is my second point, isn't just a natural thing. Paul's understanding of hospitality said it starts with God, who has shown us extraordinary kindness. Our hospitality flows from his. He changes us. And so I'm on the receiving end of hospitality from others many times in my life. And sometimes it can be a bit awkward. I've come up against that. I'm an independent person. I don't like to rely or trust on other people. But I just want to read a quote from Francis Chan's book, and it struck me on family. It's from his book, Letter to the Churches, and he says this on family life. Is it just a cliche to say that the church should be like family? I mean, it's a great thought, isn't it? But our families are our families. Does God really expect us to be this close with people we're not related to? People we wouldn't even choose to be friends with? I agree that it's natural to be close to your family and unnatural to experience this with people who are not like you. But that's exactly the point. It's not supposed to be natural, it's supernatural. What's true for the church family is true for hospitality, inside and outside of the family. It's meant to be supernatural. Look at the list of things that Paul mentions there from Paul. He says, bless those who persecute you. How natural is that? In practicing hospitality, loving others well, investing in these relationships, welcoming in the stranger, we're fulfilling God's supernatural commission. These very acts themselves have supernatural dynamic. And some of the stories about hospitality in the Bible talk about that spiritual dynamic. But I believe it's there in the essence of it. And we haven't got time to go into all of that today. But I'm going to just finish. How far should we take this? I haven't got an easy answer for you. When that nun received that letter from the Archbishop to remember the stranger because they or your brother or sister, his final words were, "A Christian cannot forget this," ringing in her ears. That was the last bit. I'm sure she didn't have an easy answer. The risks were massive for her and the convent. But what I know of this is Jesus, that it's doubtful I'll ever get and stand with him face to face and he'll say to me, "Steve, you know what? You were too hospitable. You just love people too well." This just isn't the Jesus of the Bible. The passages we looked at starts with this: offer your bodies as living sacrifices. The two words are connected: living sacrifice. To truly live, to truly taste the best that this universe has got to offer, is to lay it all down before God of that universe. To die to yourself, as Paul puts it, or as Jesus says, that if you want to save your life, then you must lose it. And I'm just going to finish now by reading that passage one more time. And maybe you think this all sounds a little bit extreme, a little bit overboard. And I'd ask you to just ask the living Jesus, the Bible Jesus, to make a connection with you. He stands at the door. He's a gracious host. He's ready with everything we need to live life he has called us to. Or maybe you know Jesus, the host. And as I read these verses, I want you to make it your prayer, your own commitment to live out what he's called you to. Start this week. Be intentional. And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all that he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. And then from verse 9 it says, don't just pretend to love others, really love them. Hate what is wrong, hold tightly to what is good, love each other with genuine affection, and take delight in honouring each other. Never be lazy, but work hard and serve the Lord enthusiastically. Rejoice in our confident hope, be patient in trouble, and keep on praying. When God's people are in need, be ready to help them. Always be eager to practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you, don't curse them. Pray that God will bless them. Be happy with those who are happy, and weep with those who weep. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just send out some questions for some further thought around that this week. I'll get them out to life group leaders just around reflecting on that a little bit more on what it means, and particularly thinking about the COVID restrictions. And obviously we want to stick with those things. And so, but just about what that might look like for you at this time, and how you grow in a biblical understanding of it. What we're going to do now is that's the end of the meeting in terms of the formal bit, but what we do in